I'm watching Bernard Riley, who does a great job, and Edward Anderson popped up. He's in the lower left-hand corner. Edward Anderson has a channel, and at first, I did not like Edward Anderson. I hated him. I hated his voice. I hated everything he had to say, but I remembered, I think it was either Dr. Jared Ball, Morgan State, or Dr. Tom. No, I think it was Dr. Jared Ball who said, we need to start listening to people we disagree with. And maybe you don't end up disagreeing with them at all. Maybe it's something else that's turning you off from the person you think you disagree with. But we should at least listen to opposing sides so we can at least know their talking points, their point of reference, if they give any references, if what they say is relevant or cogent or not. So I kept listening to Edward Anderson, and I realized why I didn't like Edward Anderson. It was because he was coming from a perspective that was opposite of mine. At first, I was a huge feminist, and all of my talking points had a feminist bent. And I looked at males as inferior to females. I thought, everything that was sugar and spice and nice was true about females. But that's not true about anybody. But that's just how I thought. Because we're raised in a society where we got to open doors, give deference to, bow down to the mother figure, the feminine energy. We always are taught to bow down and give deference and let them go first and do everything for the female. And we adopt a lot of these feminist viewpoints. And Edward was pointing this out, and I had to listen to him. And then somebody on this stream, on Bernard Riley's stream, does the exact thing that Edward says we need to stop. So Edward has a huge point that he makes against black men that we need to fix if we're going to improve our relationships with one another. If we're going to improve our relationships with one another, we need to check how we interact with each other. And Edward points out that many times we interact with other black males as females. And what does that mean? What do I mean by that? Well, many black men will look at another black man, and based on whether or not that man thinks that a female will find that man attractive or not, will determine how we, as a black man, will treat this black man. So if I think females will think this black man that's interacting with me is ugly, then I will treat him ugly. Excuse me. I will disrespect him. I will think his points are invalid based on what I think a female would think about him. Therefore, I'm thinking like a female and acting like a female because my actions are based on what I think a female will do in the situation with this male. Whether or not this female will give him the time of day will determine whether or not I should give him and his thinking and his points and his conversation the time of day. And that's acting like a female. And Edward is exactly right. And if we're going to claim that we're masculine, macho men with masculinity, then we need to act like men, think like men, and have better relationships with men and respect that man, regardless of how he looks, regardless of how he sounds or walks. If this is a respectful man making points and trying to espouse something, then we should give him the respect that we all want. And this man that gets on this stream with Edward Anderson cuts Edward off and then uses an ad hominem attack, meaning he doesn't attack any of Edward's points. He attacks Edward's perceived looks and behavior and sounds. So let me play this because this is something that we all need to check. Can Edward is on point with this? I am not saying that I agree with everything Edward Anderson says and does, but this is on point. And if we are to improve our relationships as black men, we need to check this. Let me play this so y'all can see what I'm talking about.
So it's not a looks issue. So then it's like, what is it? And the situation with Nate proves a lot of what I've been saying. And if you listen to her, I'm not like an avid listener, but people send me clips and I've listened to her long enough and know of her that I have listened to a whole show. Is she will say slick is a very shallow person. She's a very shallow person. Her idea of pro-blackness is just, it's really pretty, it's what I call sexual pro-blackness. Just like with black men, you notice how with a lot of pro-blacks will advocate for black women.
Hey, can I say something real quick? Like, why do y'all allow this sassy and to like actually kick knowledge, bro? I mean, real talk.
Did you hear that? How do you let this sassy ASS man kick knowledge? And just listen to how Bernard Riley, the host, responds, and listen to how Edward Anderson responds.
Gotta cut in and say this. No, I'll follow you. Okay, going back to
Narrow. Okay, first thing, Laro, the first thing you did from the comments, you said to Nate, women don't find you attractive. Now you're talking about Ed, like you have a what? No, you look men up and down, and you make a determination whether or not you think women like them, and then that's how you give credence to what they're saying.
Keep in mind this.
And this happens all the time. I had to think about it. This happens all the time. I know I've done it before subconsciously. You assess whether or not you think this man would be attractive to a female, and that's going to determine how you address this man. That is not right. That should not be done. That is not masculine, and men don't want to admit this. He doesn't even want to admit it because it's striking, because you don't notice it at first, and then when somebody says it, it's so striking. You're like, oh my God, I can't admit to this. But it's true. We got to admit it. The first step is to admit that it's going on. We got to admit that this is going on so we can improve our relationships with one another. Our relationships to other black men is very important to our development as a community.
Now, hold up. You that shit, but no, I chill with that, bro. You anybody who comes to
You keep doing it. If you don't like how a man looks, you don't want to hear what he got to say. That's exactly how.
Okay.
Man, hey, how about you do this? How about you do a video calling Lassie to his face? How about you do that and let's see what happens? Why don't you do?
Edward's calling out the fact that people have internet muscles. But in real life, if Edward or somebody was talking, they would not say that same thing to that person's face. A lot of people have internet muscles. This is similar to people who get alcohol muscles. Once the alcohol gets in them, now they're a tough guy. Now they're strong. This is internet muscles. You're behind the computer, far away from whoever you're talking to. Now you're strong.
No, you got enough time. Why don't you
think he's only using ad hominem attacks? He's saying you look like a bee. This is when people do not have the verbal skills to debate someone's points, arguments, and claims. They can only attack what they perceive as a physical deficiency in the person. But his perceived physical deficiency is based on what he thinks a woman would think is a physical deficiency.
Do you know that argument?
This is so true that in our community, if a female really wants to try to hurt or get a rise out of a man, they immediately attack his sexuality because it is considered very negative to be homosexual as a man. So that's what they immediately go to. That's why he used the word zesty, because a lot of black females will use that. So if a man wants to anger another man, he is acting like a female when he does that, because why would he be concerned with this man's sexuality? See, and that's the point. As a community, to figure out problems, we have to be able to think and collaborate with each other. And in an argument, if we have to resort to ad hominem attacks where we're just attacking the person, then that highlights the fact that we don't have the intellectual skills to defeat the argument that created the anger in the person. The person is really angered because he doesn't have the ability to either come up with an intellectual counterclaim or counter argument, or he doesn't have the ability to articulate his counterclaim or counter argument. So they resort to ad hominem attacks, and they choose to pick the ad hominem attack that the female will use to hurt a man. I think that's enough. I think everybody gets the point. But I just think that Edward Anderson does a great job of highlighting that, because this form of attack that we use on each other, the disrespect that we use on each other as black men, is rooted in how we've been trained to think and behave a lot of times like our female counterpart. And we gotta check that. We're not feminine. We are black men with masculine energy, and we need to treat each other with masculinity and respect.